Hello, I'm Anni Davey. I've been telling Bible stories to children for many years, and I've got some lovely ones to tell you from the New Testament in this section here. If you want to know about the background, where I got some of the background detail from, you can look it up on the web on truthortradition.com or www.korky.info, where we've written a book called Jesus, Faith and Fact. So it's all in there somewhere, but there's some interesting things here which you may not know. You may think you do know the stories, but wait and see. So let's see what we've got. Hello, I'm feeling quite pleased with myself. A few days ago, I met up with my daughters, Ella and Sally and Rosie. They're the three who live in England. And we met up at Bath and we walked the Skyline Walk, the Bath Skyline. And it's 7.5 miles, which is a long way when you're an old lady. It was a long way when you were a young one as well. But I felt such a sense of achievement afterwards. But my goodness, I was tired. And you know, sometimes it was a bit like that for this person here. He would spend the whole day on the hillside teaching people, looking after them, explaining to them how much God loved them. He told them things that they'd never understood before, and they just loved being with him. I expect you can guess his name. Let's see what it was, shall we? Shall we read it together? It was Jesus. And he was so tired, he said to his disciples, his 12 special friends, "Come on, guys, let's go across the lake and find somewhere quiet. We need a rest." So they piled into the boat. Let's put them in, shall we? They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of them. There they are. And you can't see Jesus because he curled up in the stern and put his head on a cushion and went to sleep. He was so tired. And you know, sometimes on a lake like that, it's 8 miles wide from this side to across to Capernaum, quite a wide place to be. And suddenly a wind blew up. Now what happens when a wind blows up on the water? Well, it gets quite rough, doesn't it? First of all, some black clouds appeared. And that's usually a bad sign, isn't it? And then they heard a sound like this. If you just clap very quietly, you'll hear it. And if you clap with me and make it louder and louder and louder and louder, you realise that it was the noise of absolute pouring rain. It was tipping with rain, really heavy. And so we'll draw some rain in here. It was really heavy. And when a storm springs up suddenly on the lake like that, the first thing you'd have to do is to take the sails in. So they would reef up the sails so that the boat wouldn't tip. And they got their oars out, I expect, and they were rowing away. And then they noticed that with the wind blowing up, something else was happening. The waves were getting bigger. Great big waves. And the waves were so big that some of them was splashing over into the boat. And it was quite frightening. And they began to get the buckets to bail the water out of the boat. And the faster they bailed, the more the water seemed to come in. It was absolutely terrifying. And they'd forgotten something. Who had they forgotten? They'd forgotten Jesus. And then they realised he was there in the stern at the back of the boat, fast asleep. And they woke him up. They said, "Jesus, wake up, Master, wake up. Look, we're going to drown. The water's all coming in. We're in this terrible storm." And the lightning was flashing and the thunder crashing. Oh, they were scared. And it reminded me of a time when I was in a little boat. And I'll show you a big picture of it, if you like. It's our little sailing boat. And we'd been in France for a holiday. We'd sailed across the channel from Dartmouth and we were coming back. And the weather forecast was quite calm with the wind coming in the right direction. We didn't have an engine, not a big one, just a little outboard. But we relied on our sails. And we soon realised that the waves were getting bigger and the wind was coming from a different direction to the one that they'd said on the radio. and it wasn't going to be safe to keep trying to fight our way into the wind to get to the Channel Islands. So the only safe thing to do was to turn left and to head for England. It was a long way away. So we took the sails down. We just have a little sail at the front called the jib, the storm jib. And Corky, my husband, he was steering, and I was with the two little girls, Ella and Anne, who were about 6 and 8 at the time. And the storm got bigger and the waves got bigger, and they looked as if they were high up there, and they began to break at the top of the crests. And to be honest, I had a knot of fear in the pit of my stomach. I know just how Jesus' friends were feeling. And I thought, if one of those waves comes into the boat, what's going to happen? And eventually I managed to tuck the two little girls up in their bunks inside the boat. And then Corky got too tired and seasick. I don't get seasick, thankfully. So he had to go down into the cabin and lie down as well. And I was tied on round my middle so that I didn't get washed away if a big wave did come into the boat. And we decided to go along the waves. We went along the top of the waves and down into the trough and along the next wave. And the boat stayed completely steady because it had a lot of iron on the keel and not much wind on the top of it. It didn't tip over, it stayed steady. And I suddenly remembered Jesus. He'd said, "I will never leave you or forsake you." And I took a deep breath and thought, right, Lord, we're in your hands. And please help me get this little boat safely home. And it felt as if our little boat was in God's hand, in the palm of his hand. And it felt safe. So I sailed the boat quietly all night along the top of the waves, down through the troughs, steadily. And eventually we got home to the harbour. We got home to Dartmouth, in fact. And when the disciples realised that they got Jesus with them, they woke him up, and Jesus stood up in the boat. He said, here he is standing up in the boat. He just lifted up his hands. Whoops, got a bit money, hasn't it? And he said this word here. He said, peace, peace, be still. And to their absolute amazement, the wind ran out of breath. It stopped raining. The thunderclouds stopped. The waves began to go down. And before they knew what had happened, the sea was quite calm again, absolutely peaceful. And they looked at one another in amazement. There he is. They could hardly believe it. And they said to one another, wow, who is this, that even the wind and the waves obey him? And it's one of those amazing stories which people hang on to when the disciples began to realise that Jesus was no less than God. It's a very big thing to get your head round, isn't it? But that's what helped them to believe. And so they suddenly understood that he had this here. He had not only power to heal people and set their lives right, but power over the wind and the waves, power over everything. It was quite an astonishing lesson for them. And that's why it appears in Matthew and Mark and Luke, in all three of those Gospels. They remembered that story forever. They were absolutely shattered by it because they'd been so scared. And what Jesus said to them was, why were you so scared? All you need to do is this. Trust me. Haven't you got enough faith? He was quite taken aback, I think, that they had been so scared and they hadn't trusted him. And this is what I remembered in our little boat, was I could trust him. And I felt so safe once I remembered that. And I remembered it all my life. It was a long time ago now. Let me think. probably over 40 years ago now. We never tried crossing the channel again, I'll tell you that much. But it was something which was a very good experience in reminding me how much power Jesus had and how he would never, ever leave us or forsake us, even in the middle of all that sea in a storm. And you know, sometimes we get horrible stormy things happening at home, don't we? Not in the middle of the channel in a small boat. But sometimes things go wrong and people get angry, and sometimes you feel all churned up inside and don't know how to cope with it, and it feels worrying. Maybe something goes wrong at school, or maybe you've had an argument with a friend, or something's happened and you just feel, oh dear, I can't cope with this is awful. And that's the time to remember that we can trust Jesus and that he has power to bring peace into the situation and into our hearts and lives. Even if things are going wrong, Jesus can be there with us and has the power to help. So I pray for you all that you will discover the power and the peace that comes from trusting Jesus.